All right, good afternoon. Our guest today is one of the most renowned multi-platinum songwriters and producers in the game.
True.
He has written and produced for Panic at the Disco, One Direction, Fitz and the Tantrums, Weezer, Katy Perry, Blink-182, Ringo Starr, which is a drummer in a band called the Beatles from a town called Liverpool. We're going to talk about that. Def Leppard, Carole King, Billy Idol, Jewel Train, Gym Class Heroes, and many more. To date, he's achieved 22 U.S. top 40 hits, 10 number ones, 10 top fives, and 87 top chart positions globally. His songs have been streamed over 7 billion times. Please welcome Sam Hollander. So Sam is here today to shamelessly plug his new book,
Yeah,
21 Hit Wonder, Flopping My Way to the Top of the Charts.
that's me. So, yeah, I wrote a book.
And it's a really great book. I'm going to ask you some questions, and I'm going to open it up for y'all to ask him questions. It's not every day that you can sit here in front of a successful person like Sam and ask him anything you want about music or the music business. Specifically, or life. So let me ask you first, you had a really unique childhood, and one thing that's sometimes hard for young people coming up in the music business is learning how to work with famous people, important people. And you early on were friends with famous actors. Mm-hmm. Andy Warhol was your babysitter. What can you share with our students about making that jump and working into circles with people that are, successful and ahead of you in the game?
Yeah. Hi, guys.
Hello.
A couple things I want to, as we lead into this question, a couple things I want to say. First of all, I'm older than you. And I'm so old, in fact, that I worked with Donna Summer, who's on that wall over there, which blows my mind, who was the coolest. And when I met Donna Summer, I wasn't the least bit starstruck, which blew my mind because I was a massive fan. And when I got in a room with her, I was real cool. And that emanates from what Odie's saying. I had a very weird upbringing because I grew up in the 70s outside of New York in the suburbs, and my mom was a hustler. And I'm a hustler, and my daughter will be a hustler. And my mom decided that she wanted to be an interior decorator, and she wanted to navigate the city and figure out how to, get in that world. And she partnered with a man named Jed Johnson, and they created an interiors firm, and they did apartments in the 70s of Mick Jagger and Yves Saint Laurent and people like that. And she was badass. And Jed was Andy Warhol's partner, like boyfriend partner. They lived together for many years. If you watch the Andy Warhol documentary on Netflix, the second episode is devoted to Jed. So that was my mom's partner. And I was a little kid, and I was a strange little kid. I didn't have a lot of friends. So my mom would let me tag along with her on the weekends as an appendage, because there's really nothing else, nowhere to leave me. And on one of those pivotal weekends, she drove me into the city and she said, I got to leave you with a babysitter. Jed and I are going to go out and buy some stuff. And the babysitter was Andy Warhol. And that was my introduction to celebrity and fame and all the trappings of it. And it was pivotal for me because if you read my book, 21 Hit Wonder, Flopping My Way to the Top of the Charts, Ben Bella Books, available pre-sale now, but special editions here. One thing you will learn is I also struggled with boogers as a kid. So I had an aversion to tissues. I didn't like tissues. It was a sensory thing, I would think. So as a kid, I used to rub all my nose boogers on my arm. And at Andy Warhol's apartment that day, my nose began running. And I didn't know what to do, and I rubbed all my boogers on his table. And he was sitting across from me, and it wasn't the best look for me at all. And sort of set up my life in failure, sort of bad decisions that afternoon. But it did introduce me to the notion of being around somebody who was in the Illuminati of art. And I took that knowledge, even as a little kid, I was able to apply that to the music industry as I got into it, in terms of when I got in the room with people who had achieved things, I was able to dull all the fanboy nerves inside of me. I'm a weird little fan guy, as you're gonna learn. I'm very geeky, and I'm a nerd. Like, I just went through the stacks in here and I had chills. This is the coolest thing in the world. I'm seeing issues of Cream magazine from the late 70s, and I'm like on the verge of tears. So when I get with artists, I'm able to numb all of it and concentrate it on them, and not concentrate on myself. And I'm not tweaky and strange. I'm very just hyper focused on the art, and that has supported me quite well. In my 20s, you know, it's strange being here, guys, because sitting in the back of the room as a man, this is how the entertainment business works. First of all, let's start off with, who wants to be a songwriter in this room? Nice, nice. Who wants to be in the music industry? Nice. Who has no interest in either, but it's a great elective? All right, good. Awesome. In the back of the room is a fellow sitting on the floor. He is a professor here. His name is Doug DeAngelis. So does anybody know Doug DeAngelis? Anybody take Doug's class?
I don't think I see any of my students in here.
I'm in here. Mason.
Oh, hey, Mason.
All right, so I want you guys to understand how the universe works, okay? Doug and I were partners at the age of 24 and 25, remixing records together. Doug is in my book featured prominently. In fact, Doug was the guy who ended our partnership and honestly saved my career in doing so. He was the guy who taught me that I had to get better because I really wasn't there. He was levels above me, and he's a brilliant, he's a composer, he's an engineer, he's a producer. And when you have teachers like this, when you have teachers like Odie, people who have been in this industry and succeeded, you have no idea how lucky you are. But I'm a sidebar, because when Doug and I were coming up in our 20s, Doug and I were hanging out with actors, Jeremy Piven and John Cusack. I feel like you guys might be too young to know who either of these people are. Does anyone, raise your hand if you know those names? Not bad. There was a moment in time when John Cusack was, who's big now? Who's cute and 20 and a boy?
Timothy Chalamet.
Yes, John Cusack was the Timothy Chalamet of our era, and he was on top of the world. If you see a movie called Say Anything, it is probably the pivotal 80s movie. He's the star. We were running around with these guys in our early 20s, and it was another introduction to how do you navigate the world. We saw how they handled fame, how they handled fans, how they handled their craft. And I think we both were able to apply that to how we would handle situations, and also maybe how we'd handle things differently, right? Right, Dougie?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. So it's very strange being here right now, because this is my guy back here, and I hope you sign up for his class because he's infinitely more interesting than I am. But I would say in the music business, you will meet, if you get into this, you're going to meet people who you'll, bless you, who you'll be starstruck by, who you'll be enamored with, people you've been fans of your whole life. And you will have to navigate on the fly. And it's very important how you approach people. And we'll get in deeper into that. Did I answer anything you asked?
I think so.
What do you think? 1 for 1? What do we say? 50-50? All right, we're trying. Let's go.
So the other thing I love about your book is the title, Flopping My Way to the Top. And a huge section of his book is devoted to failure. And it really spoke to me what a hustler you were. I'd like for you just to talk about failure and succeeding.
Well, it's funny because I look around this room, you're all really cool looking and you're all really interesting, you know, because you're all, it's like very different types, which I dig. But I don't know how tenacious any of you are, you know, because you're in college and you're young and you're starting out. And I think the industry right now is probably really exciting from a distance. You're like, wow, this is rad, I want to be in it. But I've been in it 32 years professionally. And I will tell you, it is the greatest life in the world. And it's the most horrible thing you will ever sign up for. And it's the marriage of both of them that makes it this magical sort of amorphous thing, right? For me, as Dougie knows, man, when I started out, I was a very creative kid, but I didn't really know how to manifest my art yet. So I was just a talker because I was very confident with an incredible imposter syndrome. And I just, you know, Doug and I had coffee this morning and we talked about it. There's no bar of entry into the music business in terms of everyone in this room is a songwriter, right? You're a songwriter. If anyone asks you, I am a songwriter. I write songs. Everyone's a producer. I produce songs. You don't like get a badge, you know? You do this program here because you're learning how to do it, but the truth be told, you're already songwriters. Technically, you're putting out songs on Spotify or TikTok or whatever, and so you're in the game as much as I am. So the reality is, when you have a career like that where there is really no bar of entry, you can really bullshit your way into it, and you can convince yourself and everyone around you that you have the goods to sort of actualize this, but sometimes you're lying to yourself because you haven't really mastered your craft. Well, I was the ultimate bullshitter and the ultimate liar. And I told everybody I was going to be the greatest. I told everyone in my town that I was going to be the best songwriter on earth. But you know, the reality was, I didn't even know how to write a damn song. I just tried to will it. And in the process of doing it, over the first 15 years of my career, I bankrupted labels. Everything I touched failed. I was literally like a walking Seattle winter. It was like gray and rain, anything I was around, and I was kind of like a toxic guy because I was so overly ambitious that it would get in the way of everything in my path. And there are all these wake-up moments along the way where I had to master the art and stop bullshitting and get really good. And when Malcolm Gladwell talks about 10,000 hours, he's not really wrong. I mean, honestly, I got better at 40 than I was at 30, and honestly, I got better at 50 than I was at 40. So the reality of it is, we're at a time now where you guys are growing up in an era of TikTok, and look, I have a 16-year-old daughter, so I'm very aware of it, plus I'm a songwriter, so I'm really aware of it. It's wonderful because it's so punk rock and philosophy, right? You can get up tonight, you guys could all go into someone's room, and you'd be like, yo, we're gonna write some record, you're gonna drop some beat, and say something funny, and it goes viral. And suddenly, these record label idiots are calling you, offering you millions of dollars. And you're like, wait, I just got offered $2 million for this song I did about, let's call it, you know, Nuts, the song Nuts. I'm nuts. And that shit blows up. And suddenly you're getting offered $2 million for I'm Nuts, right? But you haven't put the work in yet. And suddenly you've been thrust into a game that you have no idea how to navigate. And I'm watching it now because what happens with this is you will get that deal, and then the label will say, okay, you got to replicate I'm Nuts, and you go, okay, cool, I'm crazy, and you drop I'm crazy, but guess what, I'm crazy doesn't hit the algorithm, and it doesn't blow up, and suddenly you go from something that was like in the zeitgeist for one moment in time that everyone talked about for 24 hours to a song that's here. And then the pesky little record label's gonna step in, because they're gonna say, oh man, they couldn't replicate I'm Nuts. So they're gonna hook them up with Sam Hollander because he's gonna crack the code. So they send you to me, and we write, I'm psycho, I'm psycho. And that shit doesn't work either. And then it's over. And then you've been dropped from your record deal. And this whole roller coaster went a year and a half of your life. And then you gotta figure out what's next. Well, that's what my career was in a microcosm over 15 straight years of failure. And how I got to this moment was I never repeated these mistakes. And I learned from them, and I constantly pivoted and shape-shifted until I figured it out. And that's how I'm sitting here in front of you. And I aim to inspire you to tell you that no matter how sexy all this stuff looks right now and how amazing it seems that you can do something and it is magical, that there are no gatekeepers at labels to the same extent, and you're free to, create your art and put it up and instantly connect. The flip side is, if you don't have your craft tight, if you don't know your business, if you haven't really done the work, it could end very quickly. Amen.
Talking about shape shifting.
Yes, sir.
In your book, you talk about some of your influences,
Yes.
and you talk about how when you got started, people said you were retro but new.
Yes.
There was a side of you that was retro but had a fresh side to it.
Yep.
Talk to my students about your influences and how that all became Sam Hollander.
Yeah, well, I sang in bands in high school, and I was terrible. And my band that I sang in, we were in the Battle of the Bands. It was a big night for me. We came in last. And the only reason that we weren't technically last, there was a band in front of us that snuck a 32-year-old in the band and dressed him up as a high school kid, and they got kicked out. So they came in last. I was not meant to be in the front of a stage, but I was a colossal fan of records. So I had vinyl, and I spent my weekends at flea markets buying 25-cent, 10-cent cutout vinyl of every genre. When I was young, probably based on the artwork, and then it grew to be about the song and identifying what was happening, and then other different genres, and just every, these were paths, I was just going on deep dives and just chasing my muse. Whatever I felt, I would just buy it, especially if it was 10 cents. And suddenly I had 2,000-3,000 albums. You know what I mean? I just kept collecting. I looked at records the way kids look at baseball cards or anything else that you nerd out on, where you really just study. I would study the back of a record. I would look at who the songwriters were, who the producer was, who the label was, even who the A&R was. And I just began to create this fantastical world in my head where I believed that I could be part of it. And because of all the collection, I was able to identify many different genres and pull from them in my writing, dating back to the 50s. And so I could get in a room, if I was with an MC, I could get in a room and pull references that were both rock and soul and doo-wop and power pop and disco and funk and 80s electro and all these things. And I could always pull these weird influences and make them a bowl of gumbo. You know what I mean? I could make this big bowl of soup. And I think my writing began to raise its hand a little bit because I was pulling from so many sources where I felt maybe a lot of other writers were maybe were more focused on staying in the lane, right? So if I was doing pop punk and there were other writers who were literally just doing pop punk, I was pulling from new wave, hair bands, hip hop, all these other things, and infusing it into my pop punk stuff. And I just felt, because my encyclopedia of references was wider, it was very helpful to my writing.
Very cool. A minute ago, you touched on the business.
Yeah, it sucks.
And you outlined.
Don't go into it. Joking.
And you outlined your first pub deal.
Yeah.
I was kind of shocked.
Who, DreamWorks or?
The first one you laid out.
There's EMI XUS.
And you said in the book, you said you're probably thinking, boy, that deal sucks, but it got me to where I needed to be. talk to them about creatives in the and dealing with the business.
So the publishing end?
Yeah.
Yeah, so do you guys know what publishing deals are? Is that a question or you're raising your hand?
Raising your hand, affirmative.
Well played. I thought that was great. You were very fast and prompt, and I liked the way you did it. It was awesome. Thank you. Awesome. Publishing deals for writers have historically been our bread and butter. It has been our lifeline. It is also betting against yourself to some extent. And what I mean by that is publishing deals, the advance fuels the art, which is awesome, and it funds the art and gives you room to play and experiment and get out there. They also, on paper, are meant to serve you in terms of connecting you for co-writes and collaborators and things like that. What I would say about publishing deals, and this is in the pop realm and the rock realm, is they're really banks. It's a bank. And you have to enter it with zero expectations. Because truth be told, they have a lot of writers on the roster. And when you're hot, and you're coming off of a hit, if you're lucky enough to have a hit and get signed off of a hit. Some writers have a hit magically, right? Like we said, we put up, what was the name of our song that we wrote together? Nuts. We put up Nuts last night, Nuts blew up, and you got offered a pub deal, right? Well, everyone wants to work with you because you wrote Nuts, right? So you're gonna get those calls, and your publisher is taking incoming, right? They don't have to pick up their damn phone to call anybody. They just field offers. But when you wrote I'm Psycho with me and that didn't go, your phone is no longer ringing. And that's when a publisher really tests their mettle and you find out if they can actually do the gig. It is so hard, you know? So many writers are self-contained, as we know. So many writers work in camps that are completely closed off. It's hard to access these records. And because of that, with publishing deals, I always took publishing deals all the way along because I bet against myself, because I thought the advance was worth it every step of the way. I'll take it as a great story. Am I allowed to just take tangents?
Do it.
All right. Do you know how ADHD works? I'm it. I'm like the poster child. So this is pretty good because there's a very valuable lesson here. I want you on the edges of your seat. I'd love to turn down the music if someone could reprimand them in the next room. In the year 2000, I was joking, Jesus.
Get them, Olivia.
You guys, I'm like a bully. In the year 2000, I had been in a publishing deal with EMI Publishing, which was a big major publisher, ex-US. Ex-US means every territory outside of America. So I was signing a US deal. And at that time, my discography read like this: failure, 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 Carole King, Baha Men. Now that's not really a sexy writer to pitch to people, right? You're like, wait, he's worked with Carole King, he's been blessed by the gods. He's been writing with the greatest writer of all time, as far as I'm concerned. But he's also making Baha Men records, and not Who Let the Dogs Out. The half a hit that followed it up. So I was a very hard writer to sell to people, for obvious reasons. So DreamWorks Music Publishing, there was a guy there who I adored who smoked a lot of weed. And he signed me to a publishing deal because he was stoned. And he said to himself, this guy does Carole King and the Baha Men. This is amazing. This is the weirdest guy I've ever met in my life. I'm gonna take a flyer. So it gives me this massive check, right? And my partner at the time, a guy named Dave Schomer, went by Duke Mushroom, gave us a huge deal, right? And we rewarded him with failure, 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 failure. We made 5 major label records that weren't released. You're sitting here thinking, what does that mean? Well, before Spotify, before Apple Music, there were physical copies of CDs. The way labels worked it was, they would sign a certain amount of acts, just like TV stations pick up pilots, or TV networks order pilots. Do you guys know what a pilot is in television, right? So television networks order pilots. They'll order 30 pilots. Doug, 30?
Well, that's more than they used to.
All right, what are it, 20?
It used to be 16.
They order 16? How many go to network?
Oh, there was hundreds, and then they would pick up
Right.
16.
Exactly, that's what I'm saying. So same sort of math, right? So it's the same thing with record labels, right? They would make, they would sign 30 acts and they'd put out 10, but then 20 just get shelved. But there's no iTunes and there's no Spotify, which means those records end up in your vaults here. No one will ever hear them. Well, that was my career. The first 6 albums I ever made were the records that got shelved. That's after my failed rap career that we'll discuss later. So the reality of having your work shelved, my work shelved, continued at DreamWorks. I get this check, and the next 2 records fail. The third is released on September 11th, 2001, and it's a record with an American flag, and it's very inappropriate hip-hop stuff. The band is on MTV. It's my first song ever on MTV on September 10th. We spend September 11th, midnight before the towers get hit. We're in Union Square, New York City. My album cover for the record Bad Ronald is a poster that fills the entire outside of the Virgin Megastore. There are photos in my book, 21 Hit Wonder. And 8 hours later, the towers are hit, and the pictures you see on the news are the people covered in soot walking by the American flag album cover of my record as they're looking for their lost loved ones. That band's career ends that night. They are dropped by Warner Brothers 4 weeks later. Everything I touched had these kind of calamitous outcomes. I still get a pub deal with DreamWorks, but now at this point, I have to recoup a ton of money and I have nothing. So they're gonna drop me again. I've split with my partner, I'm on my own, and I get a call one night. I'm lying in bed with my wife and I get a call. It's my publisher, the guy who I told you is always high. And it's 10 o'clock at night and he's like, dude, he's like a bro from San Diego originally. He's like, bruh, what's up? He's like, bruh. He goes, I'm freaking out here. I go, dude, it's 10 o'clock at night, don't call me. He's like, no, I'm freaking out. And I figured this was the call where I'm about to get dropped, because I know it's coming because I am so deeply in debt and the company is being sold and DreamWorks will be no longer, like everything else I do. And he says, dude, he goes, I gotta read you this email, early email I got. I'm very happy with the acquisition so far. I'm very happy with the way the books look. Quick question. There's a writer on the roster named Sam Hollander. Is this Sam Hollander who grew up in Mount Kisco, New York in the 80s? He's like, is that you, G? I go, it is. He goes, does the name Joe Samberg ring a bell? I go, it does. He said, what is your relationship with Joe Samberg? I said, well, Joe Samberg lived on my block. He lived in a cul-de-sac. He was in the back. I'm on the first house on the right. He played basketball. I played football. He was a real athlete. I was not. He said, where'd you leave off? I said, well, there was a fight behind the Mount Kisco diner. And 2 high schools went at it. And we were at rival high schools at this point because I had left that town. And during the fight, everyone jumps into the scrum. But me and Joe Samberg take a step back from it. Why? Well, maybe because we're Jews and we're sort of very, very tepid with these things, but we take a step back and he sees me, he's like, dude, I'm like, hey man, how are you? And as this fight is taking place, this is not embellished, Joe Samberg and I hug because I hadn't seen him in 2 years and it was great to catch up as seniors in high school now. He said, well, that was the greatest move of your young adult life. I said, why is that? He said, well, he just bought DreamWorks last night. So a guy I knew nothing about after high school went out and killed it as the biggest hedge fund guy in the world and bought DreamWorks. So suddenly, I'm summoned up to the Oyster Bar at Grand Central Station 24 hours later where I'm sitting across Joe Samberg, who I haven't seen. Now we're all of 33. And he's like, hey, bud. He's like, hey, or 35, I got 34. He's like, hey, how are you doing? Well, I'll tell you what I was doing. I had spent that year, as my career dried up, I was making beats on Kids Bop records. I wasn't producing them, I was doing the drum programming. So if you listen to Crazy in Love by Beyonce and you hear that fresh little beat of that auto-tuned voice, I hooked up that beat, that's me. So That's what I was doing to stay in the music business at 34. And he says to me, Joe says to me, hey man, hey, well this is obviously destined. I said, yeah, it is. He said, so what's it gonna take you to stay at the company? I said, well, I don't know, man. I feel like I'm getting a lot of offers. I feel like it's pretty hot for me out there. I'm sweating profusely. And he's like, well, we're gonna have to sweeten the deal. I said, yeah. So he gives me more money than I ever had in my life. And not only that, but he says, you know what? You need a seed fund to develop acts. I'm thinking, yeah, because you're creative and you've always had an eye for talent. Yeah, obviously, because everything I touched failed, but sure, let's go with it. And he gives me an additional sum on top of the sum, which, by the way, I'm talking about like buying apartment money. And we closed that deal within a week. I never, ever go back to Kids Bop. And the first record I made during that time was for a group called the Gym Class Heroes. And I was able to take on a record for $28,000, which was the least amount of money I'd ever done anything in this business, because we were making albums back then for these major label artists that weren't coming out, but I was getting paid real budgets. So I was getting, like I was making real money like as a producer on these records. Flip side is they weren't coming out. That's fun. Like, imagine if I came in front of you right now and you're like, oh, our speaker today is a guy who's never had a record released, but yeah, you know, he gets paid a lot of money for nothing, you know? That's what I felt like every day, imposter. So suddenly I take on a record for $28,000 where I have to write, produce, mix to some extent, certainly engineer and master this record. And I took this record because Joe, the check from the guy who I didn't fight behind the diner, freed me up, and Cupid's Chokehold was birthed from that. It was a #1 hit, and suddenly everything changed in my life at 35. Anybody crying? Did I move you? Like, you know, it should be an emotional moment for all of us. I'm having a hard time with it myself. It's crazy.
I just want to clap.
Yeah, there we go. There we go.
So, Sam's book is awesome, and there's a great story in here about how he takes a chance on he's working with a famous act who can't get it together to finish the record, and he takes a chance on an act that has failed several times,
Yeah.
and that ends up being an act called Katy Perry.
Yep.
And so there's a lot of great stories in here, and I could ask him questions all day, but I want to open it up to y'all, and I want to hear from students questions you have for Sam. Yes, Newt.
So a big part of songwriting is relatability, because if an audience can relate to a record, they're going to want to pay money for it.
Sure.
But a big struggle that I know I've certainly faced in songwriting is covering heavier topics, more emotionally difficult topics, and still finding a way to make that relatable, playable, something that people are going to want to invest in, but isn't going to be too navel-gazy or overly specific, or just get people down to the point where it's not catchy. So,
One question, what is navel-gazy?
Navel-gazy, it's sort of like when you're just obsessed with your own sadness, like you're staring down at the ground and you're like, because your navel's right here.
Do you mind if I co-opt that and take that everywhere I go?
No, because it's on Urban Dictionary.
Okay, that's good.
But my question is, as a songwriter, how do you find that balance between tackling those subjects and talking about those things that people can still relate to, but making it something that's, going to be a hit?
Okay, good question. I like to write, first of all, let me start a little window into my taste. I like writing up-tempo stuff, right? That's born out of the fact that I was an 80s kid who grew up, well, originally it was a lot of disco and funk, and that leads to a ton of new wave. It's a lot of, the Replacements, R.E.M., the Smiths, Echo and the Bunnymen, even the pop of the era. It was all like 120 BPM to 180 BPM that spoke to me, so it's fast. Harder to write gut-wrenching emotional stuff when the beat is going booch, 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 you know what I mean? It's like, you can write angst, like Paramore can write, Misery Business and things like that. There are songs that work, that hit you to the core, but it's still are up-tempo and pound. But I'm not a ballad guy. So I think I'm too blocked emotionally to write that sort of thing. So I've had two hits that sort of hit those depths, and I want to explain why and my process. One was a song called Marry Me by a band called Train. It's a big song. Guess what? I did nothing. I did absolutely nothing. I'm a writer on Train's Marry Me. I did nothing. Let me tell you why. I wrote a song with Pat Monahan, the singer, called Stay On Me. Why is it called Stay On Me? I don't fucking know. It was my fault. He was my friend. We wrote a song, and he's quirky. If you guys know the band Train, very quirky. Pat nails it. Best soy latte you've ever had of me. He's amazing at these strange sort of, he twists phrases in magical ways. I got in a room with him, and I thought, okay, we're gonna write. He wanted to write something that was sort of about his wife, and it was beautiful. They just got married. And I thought, oh, that's great, man. Let's write a song called Stay On Me. And he looks at me like, what? I was like, no, I feel it, man. Stay on me, because I'm trying to out-quirk a guy who's very quirky. But he wanted to write something with emotional resonance. And I wanted to write something that was mildly funny, because I thought, well, Train's mildly funny. This will sneak on the record if I do this. If he writes something that's like too emotionally resonant, I feel like he's done that too many times, blah, blah. Big miss. Song gets immediately thrown out. 8 months later, he calls me. He goes, remember Stay On Me? I was like, yeah, that song was great. He goes, no, it wasn't. I was like, okay, it wasn't great. He said, but I rewrote it. It's called Marry Me Now. I said, oh, interesting. He sends it to me. I was like, I mean, it's kind of heavy. It kind of made me get a little emotional and stuff, but like, if that's where you want to go with it, fine. Yeah, he won. It was a hit. So I write uplifting stuff. I write aspirational stuff. I like themes of aspiration. I like uplifting themes because I'm probably pretty dark and sort of just broken at the core. So I like to sort of work through all my stuff as a form of catharsis through themes of both empowering, aspirational, blah, blah, blah. That's what gets me. That's the stuff that really speaks to me. But I will tell you about a ballad that I wrote that some of you might know, and how we got there, because it was twisting something. It was trying to make something that would resonate, something that was broad enough, and something that was gut-wrenching all at once. And this might hit what you were asking. Does anyone know the song When You Love Someone by James T.W.? Okay. Now, so we wrote that song. It's a really sad song. That's not a fun song. It's awful. 18-year-old kid comes in the room. Never met him before. It was the last session I did under a pub deal. I was signed to Universal Publishing. My deal had termed out, and I decided to take a different route, and we'll discuss Cobalt. And I decided to bet on myself for the first time in my life. I decided to not take an advance and not sign with a publishing company, but basically do an admin deal with a company for no advance, for great terms, because I really felt like it was the time to go for it. So I write this song with this kid. He comes in the studio. It's me, an incredible writer named Nolan Sipe, who wrote Honey, I'm Good, Andy Grammer. He wrote the Benson Boone song, Ghost Town. He's an incredible writer worth looking at, and a great guy. And this 18-year-old kid walks in. He's this British kid. He's never done anything. But there's an affiliation with Shawn Mendes. So he gets a record deal because he's talented. And this is right before TikTok, when people are taking more chances on artists that didn't have stories, right? And this kid comes in the room. He's a great guitar player. I like his voice. And he said, I want to write a song about a kid I've been giving guitar lessons to, whose parents told me, I think that's how it is, his parents told me after the lesson that they were divorcing, and they were trying to figure out how to break the news to him. And I said, oh, that's a fun topic. Well, that's cool. What? And I said, okay, we can chase that. And we start writing this thing. And about 20 minutes in the session, something like that, my phone rings. And it's Mount Sinai Hospital in New York calling to tell me that my dad had to go into hospice. My dad had been sick for a long time. My mom had died the year before, and now my dad was dying. And I was told to get on a plane immediately back to New York to go take care of setting up hospice for him in his assisted living facility. So walking back into that session was real fun. And I walk back in, and here are these guys already on this dirgy ballad about divorce. Now, I've never been divorced. I wasn't that familiar with all the inner workings of it, other than what I've seen from friends and what I've certainly seen in movies. But I knew that it was my job to show up that day and at least like service the song, because this kid had certainly flown in from London, and I was gonna at least like gut it out and then take a red eye back to Manhattan. So we start writing the song, and it's funny because the song is very sad. Because I like writing aspirational stuff and uplifting stuff, in any other session, there's two things I would have done. I probably would have added stomp claps on the beat, and it would like, because that's how I hear music. And I also would have had some chipper resolve, right? Like everything's gonna be great. Divorce, whoop whoop. We all win, don't worry, you know? And then one day I didn't do it. It stayed dark, and we discussed a bridge. I was like, no bridge, just despair. 'Cause I felt terrible. And we finished the song, and I get on a plane. I don't really think about it for a while because I have to deal with a lot heavier stuff. And my publisher at the time, as a farewell offering, it's like the final song I give this guy named David Gray, Universal Publishing. If any of you ever offer deals, he's fantastic. And he identified the song, and then a gentleman at Spotify identified the song. It just started to kind of do its thing. And I went on with life. I didn't really think about it because it didn't feel like a radio song to me, and it was never really a radio song. But it resonated, and I think people hear the sadness and hear there's a depth to it that I had never achieved before. And it's at 600 million streams and just doesn't stop. It's a big, big song everywhere. And that was born out of what you're saying, just trying to, you know, just stay true to the emotion and stay in the moment and stay present. And we didn't worry about the audience for it, because it was honestly, we were just working through the concept, right? It was a heady concept. I hadn't heard that in a song. I don't remember a pop song or, you know, that really, you know, written by parents telling their kids are getting divorced. It feels very like early 70s, but I don't remember a song that really hit that was a radio hit. It was an interesting concept, and that's how it hit. Did I answer that?
You did.
I tried.
Thank you.
You're welcome. One for one.
Questions?
At what point do you decide that a song is finished or an album? And how do you get out of creative blocks usually?
Okay, I'll do both. As far as completion of a song, my best stuff is done within the first 10 minutes. I believe in the primal nature of writing. So I learned a trick from one of the great writers who you should really look up is Allee Willis, A-L-L-E-E, Allee Willis. She wrote things like the theme from Friends. She wrote September, Earth, Wind and Fire, Boogie Wonderland. She wrote, I'll Be There For You, that's what it's called, the theme. She wrote I'm So Excited, the Pointer Sisters, I believe. Or no, she did the Neutron Dance, Pointer Sisters, which was a big 80s song. And she was the coolest. She passed away 2 years ago. She was so rad. And I wrote with Allie one day, and we're both top liners. And she came in, and there was a track we were writing over, and she came in, and you got to look up the visual, because she was just so fascinating. She was like this, she wore her art. You know, she was an artist, and she was just this, and when you say force of nature, she was like a hurricane. And she came in, and we put the track on. She's like, turn it off! I was like, what are you doing? She said, turn it off. She's like, I'm going in the vocal booth, have the headphones set up, and just let me sing first. I don't want to hear the music until it's already recording. The first impulse is going to be the right one from my end of the song. And I'd always been a little more cerebral, right? Because I'd always work through things. I'd voice note my first idea, but then I beat it up into submission. Man, she heard it immediately the second the track came on. Once again, I learned from it. At this point, I was probably 45, but I learned from it. I thought, oh my God, that's interesting, because I've beaten things up. I spent more time beating up songs to get them right. And I saw that Allie's take on it was so primal and fast. Since then, from that moment on, I started to notice that my initial melodies were my strongest melodies. And I would begin to chase those and then workshop those and shed those, as opposed to, it's guttural. It's the first thing you hear. So in terms of songs, I like to hit it pretty quickly. If it's something that I know is right and I know that it's in the zip code of what I wanted it to be, I'm gonna beat it up a little bit until it's perfect. But, I'm a pretty good critic of my stuff, and if I know it's like good, I don't fight for it. I know the ones that really are special, I can tell, and I think that's one thing that's helped me with record labels and publishers is I don't oversell my stuff. A lot of writers will come in a room and every song they write is the best song ever, right? Every song, I wrote the best one last night. Tomorrow. I wrote the best one today. It's the boy who cried wolf, the girl who cried wolf. At some point, your publisher doesn't take you as seriously if everything you write. I'm a pretty brutal critic of my own stuff, so if I really am passionate about a song, I feel like at least it should be in the conversation. Second question was also great. What was it?
How do you get out of a creative block?
Okay, this is weird. Any sports fans here? Any basketball fans? Does anyone know who Steve Nash is? He is a coach who just got fired 2 days ago by the Brooklyn Nets. But previously, he was one of the greatest point guards who ever played the game of basketball. Through my friendship with the actor Jeremy Piven, 10 years ago now, Jesus. I went to dinner with Steve Nash at the tail end of his career. And we had dinner in the city, and Jeremy asked him, at this point, he was probably 38. You're 38, you're a small man relatively from Canada, and you are playing against guys whose first step is 10 times faster than yours. They're 17 or 18 and they're entering the NBA. How do you keep up with these people? How do you dominate? And he said something that resonated within seconds. He said, during the season, I never take a day off. He said, I was in my third year in the NBA. My skills, my stats were going down, and it looked like my career might end pretty early. And he went to see a sports psychologist. The sports psychologist says to him, from this point forward, you will never take an off day in the NBA. Every other player will, you will not. You will train, but you're going to train doing different disciplines. You will do Tai Chi, yoga, swimming, Pilates, meditation, strength, core, whatever. He said within 3 weeks, his numbers go like this, through the roof. And he has a Hall of Fame career from that point on. So I left that dinner, and I'm walking across the NYU campus. I lived in Greenwich Village. I had an apartment in Greenwich Village. And I'm walking through, and I'm thinking about my own career at that point, and I'd had a lot of success, and I was starting to live like I'd had a lot of success. And so I was taking days off. And today I'm just gonna go leaf hunting. I like leaves. I'm gonna go look at the leaves and take photos of leaves. Like, I would just do anything. Today I'm just gonna watch football for 14 hours. Like, I would just drift into different abysses and chase them. And the second I crossed the Washington Square, I say this all the time, I crossed through the Washington Square arches and it hit me. It was the moment that I had to apply a similar writing approach in terms of, I'm not going to take a day off, because when you're a songwriter and a collaborator, which is important to note, I'm a professional collaborator. I'm a professional +1. I am not the star. I'm the guy who's in the room with the artist, like trying to craft their tale. So because of that, I'm at the whim of their schedule, and their schedule, well, what do artists do during the summer? They're on tour, right? Almost every artist is on tour in the summer, doing fairs, shows, arenas. So they're not really available. And I'm not really somebody who wants to go ride on a bus with somebody. So the reality was my summers are off. So I started to realize my life is that of like a professor, right? In terms of come like mid to late September, it starts back up and we start writing. We write up to Thanksgiving. Then Thanksgiving to Christmas is a little loose because we're artists and we're a little lazy. So maybe there isn't a lot of stuff that happens in that run. The music business does not start up on January 2nd. If anyone tells you that, they're lying to your face. It starts up like January 15th. People, once again, extended holidays. But January 15th to Memorial Day, it is on. And during those days, I decided I'll never take a day off. But I don't want to do yoga or Tai Chi or anything like that, because I'm mildly athletic at this point. But what I wanted to do was different writing tricks. So one day I would pull out a guitar. I'm terrible, but I can at least like play primal chords. And I'd sit there and I'd slug out a melody and just leave it and card catalog it on my little notes on my phone, label what it is, and keep it there. The next day, 5 titles, but they have to be great, not stuff that you've heard before, concepts that you think, okay, that's original, I like that, 5 titles. Another day, narrative poetry. I didn't even know what narrative poetry was, but I liked the way it sounded, and I like telling stories, so it's, you know, in the way of spoken word, just sort of flexing some sort of story and tale and putting down this much of it, just so the words are flowing. Another day, a verse, just a straight up verse. Another day, a chorus. And I would do this every single day. When everybody else was with their like families doing stuff on the weekend, I abandoned my family for those 2 hours, and I would put the work in. Well, suddenly, I started to crush it again. And I was entering sessions with people, I felt that I was potentially a step faster because the muscle is working. And that's how you will never have writer's block. Writer's block will never enter your sort of atmosphere as long as you have the muscle constantly moving. It attacks you when you're somewhat complacent or just being a human, you know? So don't be a human, be a machine.
That was a great answer.
I tried.
That was awesome.
All right, try. Good.
Do you ever get in sessions and you find people like trying to chase like a certain song, like A B C D E F U? Everyone on TikTok's trying to get a song like that right now. Is that like annoying, or is that like something that like is just like normal? Like they go through these trends and you're just trying to chase it.
All right, fantastic question, which leads into, if you want a little more insight into that, I wrote a Variety. I took an excerpt from my book, came out yesterday, and it's about my chapter, Writing for One Direction, okay? And like I said, I write with artists primarily. So I'm not writing songs to chase, you know, that thing. But I got out to LA, I moved out to LA, it was 11 years ago, and we got there, and LA really is about pitch songs, right? And Nashville's about pitch songs, right? And New York wasn't as much because, you know, it wasn't as hot a market. So it was mostly some weird way station for artists to hang when they're visiting the city with their, you know, and enjoying, and you get like a session in there, but it wasn't, there was a little more leeway. So with One Direction, I don't want to take away this whole article because I think it's a fun read. If you go to Variety, it's up there. But with One Direction was one of the first times I was paired with 2 writers who I really dug, and we never met, but they seemed like cool guys. And we sit down and they're like, yeah, let's write a song for One Direction. And this is right after What Makes You Beautiful explodes, and they're recording the follow-up. Everyone's talking about this follow-up, hardest record to access that I have ever seen. Since I've been in business, the heat to get on that second, it's like getting on a Bieber record or BTS, but man, that coming off of What Makes You Beautiful, like that follow-up to One Direction was inaccessible. And these 2 guys are like, yeah, man, let's write a song for One Direction. One guy's a Swedish guy who's in the band The Cardigans. I wanted to write with him because the Cardigans were my favorite band of the 90s. So, but I didn't really understand like the 2 of us writing pitch songs. That felt kind of weird, and he wasn't in that space. The other guy's a guy named Cool Kojak. He did Flow Riders, Right Round. He did Blow for Kesha, a couple other songs, but you know, he was more in the realm. Me, I was a guy who was writing with bands. I didn't know any of this stuff. And anytime I ever tried to write a pitch song, you know, placement song to ship to an artist, it always sounded forced because I was chasing, like everybody trying to chase the Gale song, right? I was doing the same thing at every moment. Anytime someone put me in a room with somebody, I would either do something that was too derivative, or to be honest with you, it was on Mars. I'd write something, I'd go, you know, I'd take a contrarian thing, so hey man, let's write some crazy thing over here. And it would of course never make the cut, you know? So we sit down to write a song for One Direction. They're like, hey man, you got any ideas? I was like, what? I was like, what is a One Direction song? I don't know how, you know, I don't write Swedish pop. I don't know what the hell this is. And he said, you got something? I was like, yeah. So I go outside and I scribble a song called Rock Me. And I sit down, I'm like, rock me. And I'm like, do you remember summer '09? Blah, 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 blah. I just start writing this thing. I come inside, it's called Rock Me. Does anybody know the song? Yeah, so there's a few. So I come in, and Peter, with his Swedish melodic math, is like, do you remember the summer '09? Don't you? And man, he's dope. Like, this guy's good, right? And it's the pre-chorus. And the pre-chorus just sails. I'm like, this guy's really good. This is neat. And Kojak puts up a beat and it sounds like kind of like pop. This is neat. This was a fun day. We had Thai food. It was good. I was like, I like these guys. That was great. Great. Now I'm gonna go back to my normal existence. And the next day we get an email from Simon Cowell. And he's like, this is a smash. I'm like, Max Martin. Max is like, I'm gonna produce it. Max is the homie. We love Max. And Max is like, I'm gonna produce it. I was like, what? And then Luke is like, Dr. Luke is like, I'm gonna produce it. So they're fighting over the song. Luke ends up getting it, produces it with Circuit. Ryan Seacrest tweets about it, makes the record, goes gold in a few countries. It's not the greatest One Direction song by any stretch, but it's a fun song, you know? So at that moment, man, I'm like reevaluating my entire career to date. And I'm like, I've been in the room with all these artists, being the fanboy, being the plus one, constantly chasing their stories and doing all this stuff. When all I had to do was spend 10 minutes writing some song and someone will cut it, how is that so stupid? So we get back in, me and these two fellas, and we spend the next like 30 days together writing songs. And everyone sucked. And everyone was a sound-alike of something going on, but a B facsimile of it. It was almost like, this is probably before your time, but they used to have commercials that were like, you know, Giorgio was a big cologne, and they used to say like, smells like Giorgio. They were called designer imposters, and they used to put these ads on every day. We were making designer imposters, but it wasn't Peter or Kojak that were the problem, it was me. Because I was really writing the lyric, and everything I did, it just was a bad version of something else, because it wasn't what I do. You know what I mean? It wasn't indigenous to my thought process. Like, I'm pretty weird, man. And me trying to write something that's slightly straight up the middle, I don't know how to do it. I don't do it well. So I get that all the time, and I would say is, those are sessions I run from, because I don't want to do a meme song that sounds like Gail. She hit it. I hear thousands of these things, you know? It's important to stay a step ahead. And I think sometimes when the fray is all headed in one direction, go against it. Stay to chase something, you will always be a step behind. You're chasing. You will never catch it. But if you can pull from it, maybe you pull from the concept of the meme song, you know, and that novelty, but you twist it in its own way that people haven't heard it. That's how you do it. That's how hits are born, you know.
Yeah.
So.
Mason.
When it comes to revisiting like an unfinished song, how do you get back in the headspace you were when you first started?
I don't love revisiting unfinished songs in general. I'm down to bury the dead. You know what I mean? If I feel like if I didn't have it, if it just like, I might pull from it, right? I might pull something. There might be a verse structure that I dig, or a title that I liked that I didn't get right. But in general, I just kind of believe in the magic of music, in terms of when it happened, when the song is there and I just feel all the parts are working, I'm gonna finish it that day and get it right, or over the 2 days or whatever, and it's gonna be what it is within reason. The ones that sort of are like fragments that I don't, and when I mean, sorry, what I was talking about with like recording just a melody or something like that, that's just to hip pocket an idea, but I don't write something that I'm like, if I've already gone down the path with it a little bit, I'm gonna finish it. You know what I mean? I don't wanna like, hey, I just sang a completed verse that's really good, but I'm gonna walk away from it now. No, I'm gonna finish it then. But in general, I like to get the ideas done on the spot. If I didn't really come back to it immediately, it means I didn't believe in it enough, you know?
I think we got time for one more question or two. Go ahead, buddy. Yeah.
Okay. Do you have any advice on like how you can be more confident in your work, or like in your skills?
Yeah, just be delusional. Yeah, like just convince yourself. Like, because the truth of the matter is, look, man, I look around the room, the honest answer is, you're all probably pretty dope. And I really mean that. And I think it's so imperative to know one thing, that this business is built on rejection. It's built on eating its young, right? If I started out with 100 people chasing it in New York City at the time, there's probably 5 or 6 of us left, and we're all pretty good. Truth of the matter is, it's about stick-to-itiveness, and just, even if you're not there yet, if you kind of convince yourself that you will be, and you just kind of believe it, and you just have those mantras to yourself, like, you know what, I'm better than that next dude. I think I'm better. If you start to wear that swagger, and then you put the work in, you can do some badass stuff, man. But you gotta sort of start with believing it internally, and don't be afraid. Here's the thing, man. There are gonna be so many jerks along the way who will try to crush your soul. I'm just being honest with you. I'm sure you've already dealt with it. Some of you probably have parents who suck, who told you, don't go into this, it'll never work, be an accountant. You might have like people around you, friends who told you at the talent show that you weren't that talented. And there's always somebody who's gonna get in your way. Well, when you enter the business, everybody's gonna reject you all the time. It's just gonna happen. You're gonna meet people, you're gonna hand them your demo, they're never gonna call. You're gonna hound them because that's what you have to do. You're gonna slide into their DMs relentlessly. They're still not gonna call. So then you're gonna start to question your own talents and think, okay, well, maybe it's me, maybe I suck. You don't. You just have to want it more than anybody. I wanted this more than anybody I knew, and I still do. I wrote a book about it, 21 Hit Wonder. But the thing about it is, this was my calling. I was put on earth to do this. I am not a competent human. I'm a man-child. This is the only thing that I was able to ascertain. I had no other skills as a human. I don't know how to pay my bills. I don't know anything. I have people who do things for me because I can't do anything else, but I can write a fucking song. And you can too. And the reality is, don't let anybody, including yourself, because you will kill yourself creatively before anyone else. And if you exist in a space of fear where you don't think you can manifest this, and you just start to doubt it, then you're gonna kill your career before it even gets started. So first thing first, when you leave here today, like, go do it. And don't let anybody tell you you can't, and buy my damn book. And do the end of the day, I promise you this, it is the greatest life in the world. Most jobs suck. The music industry does not suck. It doesn't matter what end you're in. You could literally get into education. You could get into these vaults over here where I literally was on the verge of choking up looking at the history of 200 and something years of music. Music is king. It's the greatest thing. It's the greatest gift that's ever been bestowed on us. So go do dope stuff, man. And don't listen to fools like me. Just go out there and do it yourself.
Let's thank Sam Hollander for coming today.